Welcome to Preservation Perspectives, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation podcast. I'm Lynne, Richmond, Communications and Public Affairs Specialist at the ACHP. Today, we're very pleased to be welcoming Dr. Rae Gould, Associate Director of Native American and Indigenous Studies Initiative at Brown University in Rhode Island, to Preservation Perspectives, to talk about her book, Historical Archaeology and Indigenous Collaboration, Discovering Histories That Have Futures. Now, Dr. Gould is a member of the Nipmuc Tribe and a former TIPO and NAGPRA representative. She's also a former analyst in ACHP's Office of Native American Affairs. So thank you again for joining us. Let's get right to it, Dr. Rae Gould. Welcome, Dr. Gould. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, me too. It's Native American Heritage Month, and all month the ACHP has been covering topics to inform our listeners about Native American heritage topics. And we were really excited to ask you to join us, since you and your colleagues just recently wrote a book this past year, Historical Archaeology and Indigenous Collaboration, Discovering Histories That Have Futures. Now, can you share a little of the history behind how that book came into being?
Oh, sure. I'm happy to. I'm, as you can imagine, extremely proud of that book and getting it published and everything it means and everything that's wrapped up into it. So that book, which just came out either December of 2019 or January of 2020, was the result of working together with my colleagues. So there's 4 of us that contributed to the book. 3 of them are non-native archaeologists working in academia and in CRM, actually, and pretty familiar with Section 106, in fact. And then I am an academic and a tribal person, a member of the Nipmuc Nation. So I'm the only Indigenous person who's trained in archaeology who contributed to the book. So it's the result of, we've been working together closely for 20 years, and we developed relationships and friendships, which is really, I think, the key of so much of what we'll talk about. So over those decades, the first friendship that I developed actually was with one of the co-authors, Holly Herbster, who works in CRM in 20-something years now. It's very experienced in Section 106. And we got to know each other through Section 106 because when I had my bachelor's, was working for my tribe in a number of capacities, and one of them was as the TIPO, the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. So Holly and I became friends because we would do walkovers and we would end up talking about, different projects, and, that it just evolved into a friendship because she's one of the people that really engages in Section 106 and in archaeology. In the way that I call what I really see as a need for moving beyond consultation, right? So who are you as an individual? Tell me more about your tribe. Like, how do you understand Nipmuc homelands? So that really opened the door for that friendship. We'd all been working on different sites in Nipmuc homelands. We had been presenting at conferences, over the years, probably at least 5 or 6, maybe more. And we kept saying, we really need to write a book about this. So that's how it came to be. And the other two co-authors, one is Stephen Rosowski. He's a full professor of archaeology at UMass Boston. And then Heather Pesarozzi, or La Pesarozzi, was one of his students. Both Holly and Heather were students of Steve. And I would say, very fortunate to have been trained by him in that. He is teaching, or has been teaching for several decades now, the next generation of archaeologists, whether they go into CRM or into academia. At the master's level, which is what UMass Boston has, most of them do go into CRM. So he's teaching them like how to do this work. So we had been thinking about this book. We really wanted some type of an avenue to share both the knowledge about the sites that we've been exploring and our understanding of Nipmuc history and culture. And also there's kind of like a parallel path, 2 parallel paths in the book, both the story of the people and the places that we've explored, and the story of our relationship evolving over 20 years. So it's a methodology book. So that's kind of the short answer. I can tell you also a few other tidbits about the book was that I was very insistent that it be accessible, that anyone in my tribe would be able to pick the book up and read it, since it is their history and culture that's explored. And I think we achieved that. It's an introductory book. So kind of geared towards first-year freshmen, although graduate students also read it. And it's really a model for how to engage with tribal people whose past is being explored, which is, a big part of CRM in Section 106. And really, as well, another underlying and critical point is that we made sure to kind of make it a take-home point that it can't just be about archaeology in the past, that you really need to be able to connect the work that you're doing and the past to living people who are still on the landscape. So it's probably a little bit more than, a bigger answer than you wanted, but the book is so it's deep on several levels. So I wanted to share that.
Why was it important, though, to write this book for you and your colleagues?
Well, nothing had been written like this in the Northeast, as far as I'm aware. Really, a tribally specific book that engaged an Indigenous author, who was exploring her own past and present, and an interpretation of how to do this work. So kind of a methodology book too. If you look at the Northeast, going back to the classic books, Dean Snow, William Ritchie, it's kind of like typology driven, and certainly there's been more work since then. Stephen Silliman, another colleague at UMass Boston, had done this. But none of the books really engaged it in the way that we did, in terms of rolling all of that methodology, praxis, storytelling. Storytelling is obviously an important, I don't want to use the word methodology because it sounds so academic, but it's a way that Indigenous people share about ourselves, and it's a way to teach, it's a way to share knowledge. So this storytelling aspect was really critical too. So that was important. And prior to that, I bring up people like Dean Snow and William Ritchie. And again, while we're looking at them being here 40, 50, and 60 years ago, there's still a whole generation of people who are teaching and practicing who were taught by what I call the old guard, these non-native, mostly male archaeologists who have a perception of what archaeology is, of how it explores the past, but it has been for way too long really disconnected from the present. So this was a way to kind of really bring all of that home, and especially by my presence, as an author in the book, helping to do this storytelling. And it's also, I know it's the first book that is solely focused on Nipmuc's sites. So the fact that, we explore these 3 Nipmuc sites, and we know them very intimately. So that was really important. On top of that, the personal goals that I have were, in addition to getting my PhD, writing a book, being a primary author on a book that is, it's been received really well. It's used in college classrooms. So it's continuing this legacy of helping to teach future generations. Those were 2 goals that I had firmly established for myself, so that I could be considered an expert on my own tribe's history and culture, which is kind of unfortunate that it takes having those credentials, but I knew from a long time ago I needed to get a PhD. I wanted to get a PhD, and then writing this book was a natural, outcome of being an academic and really engaged in this world. So those 2 things needed to happen, and they were a result of many things, but primarily being so frustrated with non-native people being turned to continuously over and over again as the experts of Nipmuc history and culture. So that's really the 2 primary reasons why it was important.
So as you know, being a former ACHP staffer, especially in the Office of Native American Affairs, collaboration with tribes is so vitally important, especially early on in the Section 106 process. So what do you see as one of the most, or some of the most pressing concerns for tribes in the Northeast regarding historic preservation right now?
Oh, that's a really, really good and vitally important question. I'm so glad you asked it. So you use the word collaboration, right, in the Section 106 process. But if we actually look to the law, we see the word consultation. So being able for Section 106 practitioners to really be able to envision consultation as a true collaborative process. And this is something, you know, I've been thinking about for 20 years. When I was at the ACHP, there were many conversations about this. And it's not written in the law, so we can't require it, you know, but it is really important. And I would say specifically for the Northeast, I still think there is an invisibility factor. You know, although this has improved over the last 30 or 40 years, primarily, I think, you know, kind of well east of the Haudenosaunee, you know, so that we consider New York to be part of the Northeast. So maybe I'm thinking more specifically of New England because, you know, that's my home base. Since tribes started gaining federal recognition here, you know, late 70s, early 80s, that did start to change things. But it's been an uphill battle, you know, and you know, here we are in the month of November. I'm thankful that we're having this conversation, but we're having this conversation because it's Native American Heritage Awareness Month. So every November and every like October 10th or, you know, whenever Columbus Day, now often referred to as Indigenous Peoples Day, rolls around. So this time of year, people return their attention to the Native people of the Northeast, primarily being the Wampanoag. So I'm thankful for that, but it also is a huge void, you know, that the other 10 months out of the year, people kind of don't think about New England Indians, Native people in the same way that they do other people. So there's a real knowledge gap still, and I think that this definitely affects, you know, the field of historic preservation and Section 106 in particular. So tribes in this area, like, you know, when people look at me and I tell them that, you know, oftentimes the conversation begins with, you know, they ask what I do, and I say, oh, you know, I'm helping to build Native studies at Brown University. We're developing an undergraduate concentration, Native American and Indigenous studies, and it's really powerful work. And then they're like, oh, well, what brought you to that? I'm like, well, I'm Native and I've been doing this work, you know, as a tribal member, you know, for decades. And when they find out I'm tribal, I still get questions like, oh, are you a full blood? And do you have an Indian name? It's really, really hard. And I try to be patient, and I'm constantly an educator. So I take that as an opportunity, you know, to have a conversation to the extent that the situation allows. Sometimes it's not as deep as other conversations, but there's still, and this is from local people that I meet here in New England, in Massachusetts, you know, where the Wampanoag are from, where there's Thanksgiving story comes from. And there's just so little real knowledge about modern day tribes of this area. I've seen that in the classroom as an educator for the last 15 to 20 years. Students from Massachusetts will say it just was not folded into their curriculum. So they still have, you know, that the Thanksgiving story is about it. So we're constantly working on that. So in every professional area, it's really lacking. And I don't think historic preservation is really any different, unless, like my colleagues, you really understand that there's a need to get to know people in deeper ways. We look very different than more Western tribes. We don't have these very visible large reservations. We're not, you know, reservation Indians, although we had some of the earliest reservations, the Mashantucket, Pequot, Schaghticoke, and other tribes in Connecticut, you know, that date back to the 1660s. People just don't know that history. You know, and except for the Brothertown movement, we never left our homelands. So we have a different history in that way too. We were some of the first to encounter settler colonialism. It's amazing that we're still here, you know, so kind of telling that story, and that's not going to happen in the average consultation process. The average consultation process is going to be a letter, some emails if we're lucky, maybe some phone calls if it goes deeper, but this ability to really get to know each other and know this history, I think is a hurdle. So, you know, generally a lack of recognition and knowledge about our history and culture is still, I would say, a pressing concern for Native peoples of the Northeast. And now we know also, you know, is that compounded, I'm going to get a little political here, but by the extreme racism that, you know, the last 4 years has demonstrated is still really clearly present in our culture broadly. Many tribes of the Northeast intermarried with, you know, Black people. So my tribe has every color of the rainbow, and this invisibility is very much compounded by the fact that if you have darker skin, or like me, if you have lighter skin, you're not seen as being authentic or real. And I've published about that too. So this learning process, I think, is something to be overcome. It's a pressing concern, and it should be at the heart of consultation in the Section 106 process. It should be a two-way process, and it's a real opportunity for knowledge sharing and learning. And it would make the Section 106 process so much more effective and rewarding, and engaging it in, you know, that deeper way that you expressed, true collaboration as opposed to just consultation. I would love to see that happen.
What are some of the messages that you hope that Section 106 practitioners pick up from your book?
I would say a lot of it is what I've already talked about and expanded on in the other questions, but really taking if there was like a number one take home point, it would be take the time to really learn from tribal people. That's a message in the book. It's a common thread, you know, in every chapter and in the book overall. And doing that will really influence how Section 106 practitioners see their work and, you know, the projects they're involved in. I would also say that in a world where time and money dictate process and outcome, I mean, I'm very realistic about that. I understand the Section 106 process, you know, really well, having been a TIPO in the past and then engaged in archaeology and then thought about it in a theoretical and a methodological way, and then been involved with the ACHP. So I'm very pragmatic about that. But where time and money dictate process and outcome, and, you know, in projects that are primarily related to financial gain, you know, there's a reason why a cell tower is going to be built, or Walmart storage facility is going to be built, or a pipeline. I mean, those have been big. Time is a precious resource. So if somehow we could have, and I know a fundamental change would only happen if, you know, if the regs change, but if we could somehow get people to think more about carving out time in their project planning for these real conversations, that would be, you know, really, really critical. And that's something that I think our book talks about, you know, slowing down, having conversations, thinking about it as learning, as opposed to just, you know, practical outcomes where we have to, you know, do a project, check the boxes, and basically write a report most of the time. So yeah, that's the main message of the book. And, you know, also how it came into being, that we practice this, we developed relationships. So I'm sure it's a mantra in Section 106 for any tribal person that you talk about. Really doing the relationship building will be critical to, you know, the outcome of not just this project, but like future projects and consultations that have to happen. Because once you understand, or you have that relationship with tribal people, next time you pick up the phone, it just makes the process go so much more smoothly. You know, sometimes in our case, like with this book being one outcome, those relationships can actually develop into friendships. And that is an amazing and really rewarding outcome, I think. So, you know, for us, the friendships became more than about Section 106 and archaeology. It became knowledge sharing that's really continued, and that we're handing down to future generations of archaeologists. So I'm really proud of that. You know, sometimes it's over a cup of coffee, sometimes it's over a glass of wine, sometimes it's over a grant that you know, we're applying for so that we can continue this work in the future. And this story is that story of our relationship is in the book, as much as the stories are of the artifacts, the features, and the people and the sites that we explored in those chapters.
Well, thank you again for joining us, Dr. Rae Gould from Brown University.
Oh, thank you so much, Lynn.